Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Regional Early Learning Resource Center. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Posa from the Early Learning Resource Center is the host of the program and is with us throughout the series. And John, who do we have with us on the phone this morning?
Well, good morning, Joe. This morning I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Laura Jana, who is a well-known pediatrician, educator, author, and health communicator. She's nationally recognized for her more than 2 decades worth of ongoing efforts to promote healthy lifestyles for children and practical parenting advice to new and expectant parents. Welcome to the program, Dr. Jana.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to join you.
Yes, we're so interested in the work that you do. And, really, I wanted to start off the program. You now are working as an associate research professor at Penn State's Edna Bennett Pierce Prevention Research Center. Can you tell us a little bit about what your work is with the center?
Well, sure. And I think it's probably, one of the more interesting aspects of it is how I actually got to have that position and have the pleasure of working with my colleagues at Penn State.
Yeah.
It's because as I set out to really do a deep dive in exactly the sort of things that you all are focusing on, early brain and child development, really helping all children thrive. And I set out to basically translate the research so that we could apply it and parents and child care providers and everybody could use it. I kept coming upon the work that was being done at Penn State, and in particular at the Edna Bennett Pierce Prevention Research Center. And so having taken some of that landmark research that was coming out of Penn State and translating it for the lay public, I got introduced into my now colleagues there who invited me out and said, let's work together. So my work there actually spans a range of things, all having to do with, yes, early childhood, but see, I look at early childhood as foundational human development. And given there at Penn State, you've got the #1 health and human development school in the country, there's lots of great opportunities from the impact of technology, early childhood, curriculum development, parenting resources. So it's a whole host of really exciting things going on there.
That's fantastic. Can you give us a little bit of a glimpse of some of the findings, at least early on, of what you found that may interest our listeners?
Well, absolutely. And I'll start by sharing what grabbed my attention. And I said, why do people not know about this? Like, more people need to know this aside from those reading academic journals. And it was a study that took place over 20 years, retrospective study, looking back and saying, let's take a look at kindergarten, I always say social skills, and to be even more practical about it, playing nice and sharing with others. And
Right.
What Mark Greenberg and his colleagues Damon Jones and Max Crowley at Penn State found, looking 20 years, following these children out, was that those social skills, sharing and playing nice, were very predictive of really positive future life outcomes. Or, on the flip side, if those skills were not found to be present, that they actually were kind of worrisome indicators for future outcomes that we don't want, whether that's drug use or being arrested and those sorts of things. Now, just think about that for a minute. What kids are capable of, in kindergarten, so let's just say 5-year-olds,
Right.
by teacher assessment, do they play well with others and share, has significant predictive value. And that's where you immediately start to see why it is everyone's sort of racing towards early childhood and saying, what can we do to develop those, what turn out to be what people call non-cognitive skills, even though they're very embedded in the brain science. So that's one sort of study that's coming out of Penn State that really is informing the field, because I can't think of something more compelling in an area where otherwise people sort of pat you on the shoulder and say, that's really cute and you must be really a nice person because you like talking about kids and sharing in preschool. And it has more impact than just being cute and nice.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I know one of the things that you're passionate about is tips on how we best teach and parent our children, particularly in the digital age that we live in. So I'm going to ask you, do you have some very practical tips or best practice methods for communicating with children when We all know that both children as well as adults seem to be more and more transfixed with texting, emailing, and even using all kinds of social media to communicate rather than having honest face-to-face personal conversation. I know that's a loaded question, but it's something that a lot of parents are dealing with today with their children. So how do we have some practical way of having honest communication face-to-face with our children?
Well, it's a fantastic question, actually, and it's probably the one I get the most. I've been doing lots of speaking across the country and even internationally on the power of what happens in early brain and child development and its foundational impact. And that's one that really is challenging to parents, but is really important. And when we get down to the practical level, what I'll do is it varies a little bit by age of the child.
Oh, sure.
But let's start with what we know about the youngest children, right?
Okay.
Because we're seeing this now. We're seeing, more than half of kids under the age of 1 have used iPads, right?
Yeah.
And the tendency for parents to think that their child is very smart because they can swipe on an iPad, like swipe left or whatever.
Yeah.
Here's where a good friend and pediatric colleague of mine who's really focused on children and media use across all ages said, here's the problem with that. It's understandable, but what it's really telling you is how smart Steve Jobs was, right, in terms of that skill. What we do know is the younger the child, the more absolutely critical human interaction is. And in fact, I like to present that as, especially for like 1, 2-year-olds, that it's as if there needs to be a social switch that turns on, as in real human eye-to-eye, interactions for all the learning that we want to have happen, take place. As kids get older, and again, this is the eye contact, the talking, cooing, singing, playing, and reading books to babies. And the phrase in the early childhood world now is literally responsible for the connecting of neurons in the developing brain.
Right.
And that does not take place watching a screen.
You identify.
Go ahead.
You identify a set of skills called Q1 skills: me, we, why, will, wiggle, wobble, and what if. Could you give us a brief definition of each of these skills?
Well, sure. And actually, what I did, and I did it intentionally, is I used the word, and I actually pronounced it key, Q-I. It looks like a 1 because it's capital.
Oh, okay.
But it's
Right.
Q-I. Also sometimes pronounced chi, and that's usually when people say, oh, now I know what you're talking about, Chinese culture and positive life force. But it's actually a word that has been used to describe some form of positive life force, positive energy across cultures and centuries, and that's what I was looking for. And I will define each for you, but here's what's striking. Remember the study I referenced that came out of Penn State, looking 20 years out and saying, look how important these skills are, right, in early childhood?
Right.
Here's what people have typically called those skills. What do you call them, right? Nobody had a good name, and they'd be referred to as soft, non-cognitive, and other, okay, because we've got like sort of our academic or what I call IQ skills.
Right.
Here's the problem. Soft doesn't do them justice. People kind of think soft is not as important as hard skills. Non-cognitive is absolutely wrong, and this is where the brain science has really caught up. So it's not that nobody ever thought early childhood was important before, but now when we can actually do imaging to show the connecting of neurons in the developing brain based on social interactions in early childhood, you can't call them non-cognitive. It's a misnomer.
Right.
And other does not compel anybody to believe that they're important. So that's what the word key represents, is what are we going to call these really important foundational skills? Okay? And then I said, let's take all the research and all the names, and, this goes across not just early childhood, but the K-12 education system, higher education, even jobs and workforce, and say, what is everybody calling all these sets of skills? And we've heard them all, right? Think about even in the adult world, communication, collaboration, teamwork, adaptability, resilience, grit, perseverance, ability to fail and adapt. And what I did was I said, let's make them simple. Let's look at the evidence and make it so that, everyday parents, people working with kids in childcare can see it for themselves, understand it, and apply it. So I'll run through them sort of quickly, and then we can do a deeper dive if you like. Me skills: self-awareness, self-control, impulse control. And that's being in control of your own thoughts, feelings, and actions. Really important, not just in early childhood, which is when they have their foundational development, but throughout life. And in fact, you see that even in the workforce literature, really important for job success these days. Second one, we skills. And it's just, they're meant to be very intuitive. Just like it sounds, those are the people skills.
Right.
The sharing and playing nice with others and perspective taking and empathy and things. Okay? So me and we together, if people have heard reference to social, emotional, and emotional intelligence, me and we combined is what makes up that formal definition of emotional intelligence.
Right.
Why skills, questioning and curiosity. Will skills, the motivation and drive, sort of that stick with it, can do attitude. So me, we, why, will. Wiggle. Now it's interesting because I did this on purpose, saying wiggle is physical and intellectual restlessness go hand in hand, and they serve people very well, right? In fact, innovators are almost universally described as physically restless, right? You're out in the world exploring and touching and kind of manipulating things and figuring out the world. And then think about what we do with young children. It's always been much more of a don't look, don't touch, don't poke, don't poke, grab, don't touch. And it's limiting their ability to be intellectually restless.
Yeah.
Okay? Wobble comes from the Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down concept, which is you want to let kids wobble, right? So safely fail. Okay? Not massive failure. Don't take away the bike helmets. Don't do all the things that put them at significant risk. But the idea that we need to let kids practice failing and adapting and kind of overcoming obstacles is really key. And then the last one is what if. And that represents imagination, creativity, innovation, and also hope, and kind of tying it all together. If why skills are questioning how the world works, figuring out how the world works, then what if skills represent the ability to imagine how the world could be, right? Seeing something that's not immediately in front of you. And that's great when you're thinking about innovation and how, sort of the glitzy stuff associated with innovation. But it also brings us right back down to the idea of what about the kids who are living in adverse situations or less than ideal circumstances. If we can't make sure that all children have the ability to see a world that's better than the one right in front of them or circumstances that are better, then we all have problems. And that brings us to this idea of key for all, that these skills apply to everyone, but we have to make sure all children get these foundational skills and do it early in childhood.
I have a follow-up question regarding two of these skills.
Okay.
Wobble. Okay, parents and grandparents, too, of small kids are intent, if not obsessed, with the kid making progress. So are they going to tolerate, how do you get them to tolerate the wobble factor? And that's the first question. And the other one is the what if. Does our rigid educational system allow for a child to what if when they're presented what is the course study? So
Sure.
those two questions, wobble and what if.
You've actually just defined, that is exactly what I was going for, is making people stop and think through those sorts of things. If we know, and listen, these skills tie into what's being discussed at the World Economic Forum and skills gaps in the workforce and things, right? So global relevance across the entire age spectrum. And my point was, let's look at what we're doing in early childhood, where we now know these skills have their foundational development if we get it right. So to your question about wobble, that is exactly the point I was making, because for each of these skills, I wrote them up in a book called The Toddler Brain, Nurture the Skills Today That Will Shape Your Child's Tomorrow. And what I did for parents, it's written in the form of a parenting book, and grandparents, okay, is I said, let's think about what the developmental milestones are, right? I'm a pediatrician, so let's think about the developmental milestones in a little bit of a different context. So for each of those skills, right, let's take we skills, it's communication, so you look at language development and listening and put your listening ears on and things like that, okay? But with wobble, I always ask parents when I'm speaking with them, I said, okay, let's think about this. What would you think the developmental milestones in the first 5 years are related to wobble? And then I always jump in. I say, here's the thing. Don't think too hard, because there are none, because developmental milestones are all successes, right? And we've gotten so used to assessing young children, across the board based on their successes. And you and I both know that means that it also is who can take a picture of it, post it on social media, and say my child or my grandchild did it first, best, fastest.
Exactly.
Okay? And that's a disservice given all we know about what skills are important in today's world. It's not who gets it done first, fastest, best, right, gets the right answer, because in an information age where everything is on a smartphone and we've got information overload, it's not who gets the answer fastest. It's who knows how to ask good questions, who knows how to do, the world's changing very quickly, who knows how to adapt based on new information. So what I emphasize from a very practical standpoint, if you're watching your grandchildren and you see your grandchild trying something over and over, and it could be stacking blocks, and then they fall over because the biggest one is left and the small one's at the top, and you try to put the big one on and they all fall over, and then your grandchild tries it again and tries it again, that is worthy of recognition, right? That is a skill that when you see it, I've been in a room full of global business leaders who see a video of a young child trying to stack blocks, biggest to smallest, and it takes, several minutes worth of failed attempts. Mm-hmm. And their universal reaction is, there's the kid you'd hire. It's that persistence and your ability to overcome failures and adapt. So that is the point of wobble, is learning to tolerate and recognize the value of wobble as opposed to just praising the successes.
Another word that's used today for especially in the education world, grit, Grit.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of a buzzword, persistence. And,
yes.
There's so much in that journey to find the right answer or to explore. Absolutely. We're talking with Dr. Laura Jana. Dr. Jana is often referred to as the connector of dots. She finds connections across disciplines and crystallizes big ideas into far-reaching real-world applications. Dr. Jana, I know that you have done a lot of work in Nebraska at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and you continue to serve as a strategic consultant to numerous organizations. I found in your background something very, very interesting, and I'd like you to talk about it a little bit. You were the founder and a 9-year owner-operator of the Primrose School of Legacy. And I know that was in Omaha, Nebraska, and that is a premier 200-student educational childcare center. Now, I want to ask you, I would like to think that most quality childcare centers are educational, but tell us a little bit about this School of Legacy that you started.
Sure. Well, I actually became familiar with Primrose, which is actually a franchised educational childcare system. Back when I have 3 kids who are all 3 in college this year. So that's my parenting milestone.
Right, right.
But back when my kids were all in childcare, my kids ended up attending a Primrose in Denver.
Okay.
And, as a pediatrician focused on child development and also safety and all injury prevention and all sorts of other things, I was just struck as a parent by, I really liked the Primrose structure, the approach, the curriculum and things. When I moved to Omaha, I saw a distinct need, right? There was very, very long wait lists, even for 2- and 3-year-olds, not just infants, and a community that I thought would really benefit. So even though I was in clinical practice, right, seeing patients, and my husband's a surgeon, and we have 3 kids under the age of 5, I didn't think probably as hard as one might otherwise, and I thought I'm going to get a Primrose here in Omaha. I'm going to, buy the land, build the building, open the school, and run it.
Right.
Which is what I proceeded to do. And my view was, what was interesting to me, because I was already sort of looking at the systems level of what is quality early childhood education. Part of what I've always done in the parenting world is I've always said, listen, I don't tell people to do things I can't figure out how to do myself. So there's sort of that gold standard recommendation, and then there's the parents who say, or the grandparents, right? Yeah, right. How is that ever going to happen?
Yeah.
I've always focused on that. So in early childhood and in early education, I thought, you know what? If I realized how many kids benefit from and are in early education settings, it was largely neglected, right? I mean, I'm talking 10, 15 years ago. There wasn't a lot of infrastructure. There wasn't a lot of attention being paid. And in a lot of cases, when you say it's educational, quality early childhood is educational. A lot of it at the time, and still is in many places, it's babysitting.
Yes,
and so how do you combat the idea that sitting a kid in front of a television set for 8 hours and making sure they get some food and they take a nap, get their diapers changed? That's not what we're talking about. My 10 years spent, and now I actually consult for the Primrose schools at a national level, and there are now about 400 of them around the country. And I'm actively involved in how do you implement quality, which means what is quality in early childhood.
Right. After you were in private practice for so many years, you also co-founded, it's called the Dr. Spock Company. And now we have a little bit of an affinity towards Dr. Benjamin Spock because He did most of his groundbreaking work at when he was at the University of Pittsburgh, which is not too far from us. You're still very much involved in that, are you not, in terms of your practical parenting consulting?
You know what? I'm not so much with the Dr. Spock company anymore. That's actually what launched me into the whole world of sort of how do you communicate messages? Basically what everybody wants, which is there's all this, recognizing there's this great research, but how do you get it out in terms that people understand and can apply? I met Dr. Spock as a medical student. I invited him to come speak at my medical school, and we ended up being friends. You know, I ended up kind of working with him. And remember, I was very young, and I was moving towards a career in pediatrics. And then he engaged me to consult for the last edition of Baby and Child Care when I was in the middle of my pediatric training, right? So I was a pediatric resident. That's where I realized that I stood to make a much bigger impact than solely seeing patients one by one in my practice, which I love to do, right? I'm a kid person at heart, which makes me a child, family, community-centric person. But the ability to get information out to all people, right, to really help improve the lives of all children, I got from Dr. Spock, and that's where I worked on the last edition of his book. I helped, the website we set up was in 1999. I mean, it was the rise of the internet it was before the internet bubble burst, so we were very early to try to bring his work and thoughts to a much broader audience.
Right. Now, I'm going to bring him up again, and I'm going to ask you a kind of a deeper dive question.
Okay.
What do you think Dr. Spock today would be pleased with in terms of our work that we do in early childhood development, and what would he not be so pleased with?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's actually not that hard to answer because I think some of the same things hold true now that held true when he was alive.
Right.
One of the things that was most impressive about Dr. Spock was he actually spanned, I think it was like 7 decades worth of professional pediatric practice and doing the work he was doing on a global scale.
Right.
And if you look at how much he shifted, right? If we want to talk about it, he had great wobble skills, right? Adaptability and changing based on new information. Because at the end of, when he was in his 90s, he was addressing issues that had never even been dreamed of when he started out. So that's great. And I think he was sort of leading that curve of what we are forced to do now, which is the world's changing really quickly. And the idea that you have to be able to adapt, he's one of the best examples of it.
Right.
In terms of we're moving in the right directions based on what I knew he believed, was the other thing is he was somebody who pushed back against rigid developmental milestones.
Yes.
Right? Setting a set age, date, time stamp on when somebody had to achieve something. And he pushed back on it for the very reason that we see being problematic now, right? Where it becomes a competition and who can do it best, fastest, first, check off the box. And if you look in both the education realm and in the pediatric realm, it's a big challenge because on the one hand, we want to make sure that kids are meeting their developmental milestones in the sense that, for example, early identification of developmental delays is really important because we know that if we catch them early, we can impact outcomes for the better for those children. At the same time, not recognizing that there's individual differences, that it's not a race, and that the whole focus shouldn't be on that, whether it's assessment or milestones, is something that I know Dr. Spock really pushed back against. And we see it now. And again, the other place that happens all the time is media. When I get interviewed by the media in general, people want to know an exact number, an exact date, an exact age, whatever it is. And the world doesn't work that way.
That's
it's somewhat fluid and there's ranges of normal.
Absolutely. Hey, our time has run out, Dr. Jana. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being on the program, Dr. Laura Jana, and good luck in your work with the Edna Bennett Pierce Prevention Research Center. We hope to have you back again. Thank you.
Well, I would love to join you. Thank you so much.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Early Learning Resource Center, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.